Hello, everybody. It's Marianne Bailey with the Hip Senior Podcast, Book Edition. Today, we are here with Loretta Veney, and we are talking about her book, Being My Mom's Mom. Loretta, welcome to the
Yes.
podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm always thrilled to have you. So, Being My Mom's Mom,
Yes.
tell me about this book.
Ah, well, it's a book that I hope helps caregivers, especially new caregivers, sort of navigate this journey. And it's just one of my all-time faves because she actually was the reason for the title. I think everybody who is a caregiver of, particularly of somebody with dementia, remembers the whole diagnosis and everything, and but what they tend to remember is the role reversal. I try to let her be as independent as possible for as long as possible. I don't think my mother had ever been to McDonald's before dementia. I'm not kidding. And it became our favorite place, and she would always say, "Have I ever been here before?" We went every week. And so one of the times we're in the line, and the nice little cashier, "May I help you?" And my mother says, "I'd like an apple pie, please." And the woman looks at me as if for permission. And I say, "Well, you can have an apple pie, but you have to eat all your lunch first." And the cashier bursts out laughing. And my mother looks right at her and she says, "I used to be her mom and now she's mine." And I was like, "I'm gonna write a book about you." And she used to always say, "Who would want to read a book about me?" And I was like, "Okay, thankfully, quite a few people, because that's how I paid for her care." So really, if I'm transparent, I would say I wrote the book to pay for my mother's care. It's pretty much as simple as that. When my mother was diagnosed at 77, my greatest fear, aside from the disease itself, was that she would outlive my money. And so every book I sold, every speech I gave about the book was to prepare for her care. I think what readers get from the book, I said it, especially is helpful, and really at any stage, but especially people starting out, because I was so woefully unprepared for this diagnosis. My great
Everybody
grandmother
almost
lived,
is, right?
oh my God, yeah. My great grandmother lived alone till she was 101. So here this woman is at 77. I'm like, this is probably not going to go as I had intended. And so we hadn't had any discussions about where do you want to live, what are these things you want to do. And I knew, of course, about her financial resources, but still, you need to have these kind of discussions. So I talk a lot in the book about preparation and patience and hope and humor. So all that's in there, all the things you need to be successful as a caregiver. I waited way too long to try to ask those questions. It's fine if you're driving down the road and you see this beautiful new senior community and you say, "Oh, I want to live there." Okay, but you got to have a very honest discussion about, are the finances going to be able to handle that place? I speak at a lot of places where I could never, ever afford to put my mother. And so some of these things are so expensive. You have to discuss those kinds of stuff. And a lot of families, squabble over where to put mom or dad and that kind of thing, or they want to keep them at home. And so there's a lot of that. But if you have these family meetings early on, then all that squabbling is out, because the person gets to speak for themselves. And because everybody thinks they knows what mom or dad wants. So I talk a lot about that in here, and why that's important, because it takes one of those stresses away about what's going to happen later when you can no longer live here by yourself. I think that's key. The four most important things: preparation, patience, hope, and humor. Because as you mentioned, you had such a great point just a minute ago about how hard caregiving really can be. And you need hope, because if you, especially during the pandemic, man, and it was so easy to lose hope, because not only were you probably doing it alone, if somebody wasn't inside your bubble, it's easy to give up hope when you're isolated.
Really is.
I think we add lots of time to our loved ones with the activities that we do. I get so many questions about the Lego bricks. People say, "Do you think you prolonged your mother's life with that?" My mother had a ball with the Lego bricks. And so, yeah, my job, I felt, was to bring her joy every day and to engage her until that last day. So I did that. I think I did absolutely everything I could, and especially on the joy end. We had a good time. So
That's
as
amazing.
nasty as a disease as that is. So that's what I hope they really, everybody's perspective is different. So this is my perspective going through it. But what I get feedback from the book is that it really does help them with the preparation and the patience. And people are like, "Oh, you really do. You're right. You need a lot of patience for this disease in particular," which is true, because of the repetition. They say the same things over and over. And so one of the things we found, sort of accidentally, was when my mother wasn't repeating the same thing over and over and over is when we were doing activities with her. So we just kept that up. And so we tried to minimize it as much as possible. So you come up with all these different strategies of how to survive the different things that go along with this disease. So
Yeah, we often talk about them how to use like an Amazon device. I don't want to say her name because it'll trigger
yes,
me.
yes, yes.
But because you
Yes,
can ask that the same thing five
yes,
times. What time is it? What is the weather?
that's right.
Who's the
And they never
president?
get upset
And they
about you
don't get
asking.
upset. They don't get impatient and stuff like that. So,
So
like I said, I
true.
taught technology for 20 years. And when I started teaching people like how to use these, they're like, oh, those are for lazy people and this and that. Being my mom's mom, people read your book, they put it down. They have one thought about your book. What do you hope that one thought would be?
I can do this.
That's fair.
Yeah, because and people say, you give us so much hope. Oh, I read your book. Oh, I feel so, inspired now. My website even says, moving caregivers from I give up to I got this. And that's the goal with every speech I give. In this book in particular, I just like look at that little happy picture. It's one of my favorite pictures, doing one of her other favorite activities, looking at her yearbook, which she could name all the people, by the way, even
Nice.
after she forgot who I was. But what I love, about that picture, this is middle stage, going to the end. She could still name everybody. But, when I looked at that picture, it does kind of, fill you with hope. But when people say, oh, I learned a new strategy for patients. Oh, and, I was so down when I picked up your book and now, I have hope. So yeah, I want people to walk away saying, okay, I really can do this, especially if you're the only one, you got to do it. But you also have to believe you can do it too.
We're going to rename you Loretta. I got this, Veney.
And I get all kinds of names, for TSA, I'm the Lego lady. Who's that lady with all the Lego bricks again? So yeah, I got all kinds of names. And my mother's name for me at this stage was Very Nice Person. That was my name. You get all of that. And people took away from that too. Like, wow, you were okay with your new name kind of thing. And, whether you're okay with it or not, you're okay with it around them. And one of the things that people also say they love my honesty in this book, because if I was okay with my mother not remembering who I was or what our relationship was, everybody else needs to be too. So whenever people would say, you know who that is, I would like, hey, don't do that. Please don't say that to her, because if I'm okay with it, she doesn't know who I am. That was one of my biggest pet peeves. Do not correct her or admonish her for not knowing people. So I was pretty upfront when people were going to go visit her. I'm like, okay, so she is not going to remember. Really? I've known her for such a long time. So I want to make that clear before you
Right.
go. And Loretta didn't tell me she wasn't going to remember. So I tried to,
But
I was very proud of
expectations.
that too.
Yeah.
To
All right,
prepare
Loretta.
people.
Thank you so much for writing Being My
You're
Mom's
so
Mom. I
welcome.
appreciate you so much. And I just, everybody go buy her book. That's all I have to say.
Yay. Thank you for
All right.
having me.
Thank you for being here. Take care. Bye bye.